The episode begins with something completely ordinary. Peter and Brian are walking down the street, joking around, enjoying an evening stroll. Peter tells a dumb joke. Brian gives his usual sarcastic chuckle. Everything feels normal, until a stray dog, dirty, wild-looking, fur bristling, suddenly runs out from behind a parked car. It lunges at Brian, bites him, and bolts into the distance before Peter even realizes what happened. "Whoa! Brian, are you okay?" Peter shouts. Brian looks at him, and in that moment Peter freezes. Brian's pupils suddenly dilate, massively, unnaturally, spreading like black ink across his eyes. For a second, his expression goes blank, empty, like he doesn't recognize the world around him. "I'm fine," Brian says, too calmly, too emotionlessly, like he's repeating someone else's words. Peter doesn't believe him. The next day, Brian looks worse, much worse. His pupils stay huge even in bright light. The fur around his neck stands up as if permanently electrified. His canines are longer, sharper, visible even when his mouth is closed. He barely speaks, and when he does, it sounds like two voices are overlapping. That evening, he paces the house in long, quiet steps that leave no sound behind. Peter catches glimpses of his shadow bending strangely on the walls, lagging a half-second behind his movements. Stewie eventually says, "Peter, I'm taking him outside. I think something's wrong with him." And Stewie leaves with Brian. Hours pass, then Brian returns. Alone, Peter rushes to him. "Brian, where's Stewie? Where is he?" Brian looks up slowly and smiles, a huge, unnatural smile stretching too far across his muzzle. Then he starts laughing. Not a normal laugh, a broken, echoing, strangled laugh. Stewie never comes back. Terrified, Peter and Lois drive Brian to an animal shelter, hoping vets will help him. Medicine, testing, anything. The staff say they'll keep him under supervision. They promise everything is under control. Days pass. The house grows quiet, too quiet. One evening, Peter comes home earlier than usual. He opens the front door and instantly feels something wrong. The air inside is cold, heavy, unmoving. Lois? Chris? Meg? No voices, no footsteps, no sounds. He steps deeper into the house, and then he sees it. Brian is standing in the middle of the living room, but it isn't Brian anymore. Before Peter stands a massive creature, towering, monstrous. His neck fur has grown into a full bristling mane. His fangs are enormous, jutting out even when his mouth is closed. His limbs are thick, powerful, and his chest rises with slow, thunderous breaths. His eyes glow faintly red. And most terrifying of all, he stands upright on two legs, like a person. Shadows tremble around him as if the room is too small to contain him. Peter steps back. The creature steps forward, and in a soft, eerily gentle voice it says, "I came back, Peter." The episode begins with something small, almost harmless. Lois notices that Stewie looks a tiny bit taller than usual. Nothing dramatic, just barely noticeable. She smiles and says, "You're growing fast, sweetie." But Stewie doesn't reply with a joke or a sarcastic remark. He simply stares at her with a long, heavy, unreadable look and quietly says, "Much faster than you think." The next day, he's already up to her shoulder. His voice has changed, deeper, slower, with a strange, trembling tone beneath it. Peter jokes that Stewie might finally be useful for basketball, but the laughter dies instantly when he sees Stewie standing perfectly still, eyes locked on him, studying him like an experiment. By the second day, Stewie is taller than Peter, no longer a baby, but something that looks like an adult stretched out of a child's proportions. His face is still Stewie's, but enlarged in ways that look wrong, with features elongated just slightly too far. His shoulders have broadened, his arms hang a bit too long, and his eyes are empty now. When he speaks, his words come slowly, carefully, like he's choosing them not from English, but from some other language entirely. Stewie moves through the house like he owns it. No tantrums, no jokes, no whining, only watching. Especially Lois, especially Brian. Lois asks what's happening to him, and Stewie bends down, far too close, and answers in a calm, adult voice, "I'm finally becoming what I was meant to be." On the third evening, Peter comes home. The house is strangely silent. Only one light is on in the living room. When Peter steps inside, the first thing he sees is Lois sitting on the couch, hands folded, eyes dim, expression flat. Next to her is Brian, head lowered, defeated, and wearing a metal chain around his neck like a real dog. He won't look Peter in the eyes. Standing in front of them is Stewie, enormous. His head almost reaches the ceiling now, his childlike face stretched further, unsettling and distorted, his smile appearing and disappearing, like he's practicing how to mimic emotion. He turns slowly toward Peter. "From now on," Stewie says, voice heavy and calm, "I'm the head of this family. Things will be better. You weren't managing it well." Peter steps back, horrified. "Stewie, this is insane. You can't..." Stewie tilts his head at a sharp angle, joints cracking softly. "I can do anything." Lois tries to speak, but Stewie's eyes snap toward her, and she goes silent immediately, as if the sound drains out of her throat. Brian whimpers quietly. Peter gathers courage to argue again, but Stewie takes one step toward him. The floorboards groan, the lamps flicker. "The era of chaos is over, Peter," Stewie says. "Order begins with me." The lights go out. The episode cuts to black. The final post-scene appears without sound. The dining room table. At the head sits Stewie, enormous, calm, perfectly content. To his left sits Lois, miserable, hands folded, eyes blank. To his right, on a chain, sits Brian, like a pet, staring down at the floor. The camera slowly pulls back. Stewie turns his head toward it and softly says, "This is how it was always meant to be."
It started small, so small that Lois didn't think twice about it. One morning, Stewie sat at the table, unusually quiet, staring at nothing with a strange, fixed expression. He didn't complain, didn't insult Brian, didn't threaten to build a weapon. He just sat there with his hands folded perfectly still. Lois joked, "Wow, Stewie, you're being so well-behaved today." He slowly turned his head toward her, too slowly, and said, "I'm learning." Brian was the first to notice that Stewie's pupils had changed. They looked narrower, sharper. When Brian asked him about it, Stewie smiled, a small, unsettling smile, and replied, "Evolution requires adjustment." But his voice sounded doubled, like another faint whisper was speaking along with him. A day later, Stewie stopped blinking. Entire conversations went by, and his eyes stayed open. Chris mentioned hearing Stewie walk around the house at night, but said the footsteps didn't sound like his. Too heavy, too long between steps. Meg said she saw Stewie standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., facing the wall, whispering something that sounded like numbers. Lois tried to comfort herself, telling Peter that Stewie was just going through a phase. But one evening, she saw Stewie's silhouette stretch across the wall in a way no light could naturally create, bending, elongating, twisting as if something inside him was rearranging. The next morning, Stewie didn't eat. He just sat at the table staring at each family member in perfect silence. When Brian asked him what he was looking at, Stewie answered, "I'm learning how to replace unnecessary things." By the third day, his skin tone looked a shade too pale. His head shape seemed almost wrong, slightly uneven, as if it was becoming something that didn't belong in a cartoon baby's body. He stopped using his usual vocabulary. Instead of his sarcastic wit, he spoke in short, flat phrases. "The house is changing. You don't see yourselves clearly. You'll understand soon. That night, Lois awoke to the sound of dragging across the hallway floor, like slow, rhythmic, like something being pulled. When she opened the door, the hall was empty, but the floorboards were scratched in long, straight lines leading to Stewie's room. She opened his door. The crib was empty. The window reflected nothing back at her, just blackness, as though the world outside had vanished. The next morning, Stewie reappeared at the table as if nothing happened, but he was taller, his limbs slightly too long, his onesie stretched tight around joints that weren't shaped the same way anymore. "Stewie, honey, are you okay?" Lois asked. He looked at her with that same empty stare and whispered, "Almost." That evening, Peter went down to the basement to look for him and never came back. Lois assumed he'd fallen asleep down there, but Brian felt something wrong in the air. He refused to go down the stairs. By the fourth night, only Lois dared to search. She went into the basement, calling Peter's name. No answer. The lights flickered as she descended. At the bottom, she saw something in the corner. Small at first, sitting with its back turned. "Stewie?" she whispered. The figure turned toward her. It was Stewie's face, but stretched, warped. The features too wide apart, the smile too thin, the eyes too deep, not blinking, not breathing in any recognizable rhythm. "Mother," it said, but the voice wasn't Stewie's. It was layered, distorted, echoing around the basement. "I finished learning." Lois stumbled back, shaking her head, whispering, "You're not my baby, you're not him." The creature took a single step and the lights above them dimmed almost to black. "I am what he became," it said. "And now, you will stay with me." The basement door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked. The light died. When the camera cuts, the final scene shows the Griffin living room. Meg, Chris, and Brian sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly forward. In Stewie's little red chair sits the new Stewie, perfectly calm, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, watching the family like an observer. He tilts his head just slightly. The screen cuts to black.
It started on a night that felt colder than usual, even though the thermostat was set the same as always. Peter woke up around 2:37 a.m. because he heard Brian pacing in the hallway, slow, uneven footsteps, like he was dragging one paw behind him. Peter got up, annoyed, ready to tell him to stop doing dog stuff so loudly, but when he opened the bedroom door, he froze. Brian was standing halfway down the hallway, but not like Brian. His back was arched, his fur stood straight up along his neck in jagged spikes, and he was breathing in long, shuddering gasps, as if every inhale hurt. Brian, you okay, buddy?" Peter asked. Brian turned toward him, not just his head, his entire upper body twisted in a way no dog's body should. His eyes were wide, unfocused, shaking. Before Peter could react, Brian charged. The hall lights flickered violently as Brian sprinted toward him, claws scraping deep into the wooden floor. Peter screamed and ran back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him just as something huge crashed into it from the other side. The door bent inward. Brian's growl, deeper, layered, wrong, vibrated through the walls. Then, suddenly, silence. Peter waited for minutes, maybe hours, too scared to move. When morning came, Brian was gone. For the next couple of days, the house felt wrong. Shadows moved a little too slowly. The nights lasted a few minutes longer than they should have. Lois asked where Brian was, but Peter couldn't explain without sounding insane. Chris swore he saw something big behind the garbage cans at 4 a.m. Meg said she heard heavy breathing outside her window. No one slept. 2 days later, they finally found him. Or what used to be him. A neighbor reported strange noises coming from the woods behind the Griffin house. Not screams, not growls. Something between them. Peter, Lois, and Brian's old caller headed into the forest together, though none of them were sure why. The deeper they went, the more wrong the trees seemed. Bark peeled off in long strips. The branches were bent downward as if something huge had brushed through them. The air felt heavy, thick, pressing into their lungs. And then they saw it. A clearing. Dead quiet. No wind. No birds. In the center stood a creature, massive, hunched, covered in rough, spiked fur. Its neck bristled upward like a crown of knives. Its body was bigger than a bear, but its outline shifted and glitched, as if it wasn't fully connected to the world. Peter whispered, "Brian." The creature turned. For one split second, they saw Brian's face, stretched, trembling, begging, buried inside the monstrous shape. Then the face twisted into something else, something that wasn't Brian, something that had learned to wear his shape. The creature let out a long, hollow exhale that made the trees shake. Then it moved. Peter and Lois ran, but the forest twisted, paths curling into each other. Every direction looked the same. The creature followed without rushing. It didn't need to. It knew the woods better than they did. It knew how to wait. The final shot of the episode showed the Griffin living room, empty and quiet. Brian's food bowl sat by the wall. His collar was gone. The forest outside the window swayed unnaturally, like something large was moving between the trees. A pair of glowing eyes appeared for just one frame, too fast to register unless you paused. Then the screen cut to black. It all started when Peter came home one afternoon, carrying a huge cardboard box, and proudly announced that he'd found the perfect new dog to keep Brian company. Brian was suspicious right away. Nobody had asked for a second dog, and Peter looked way too excited about it. When the box opened, a big dark dog stepped out. It didn't bark, didn't wag its tail, didn't act nervous or playful. It just stared at everyone with this strange, overly aware expression, like it already understood the entire house and everyone in it. Lois tried to pet it, but the dog pulled back slightly and let out a quiet rumble. Not aggressive, more like a warning. The kids said something felt off, but Peter just laughed and said the dog was shy. That first night, Brian realized something was wrong. The new dog walked around the house almost silently, but its steps were too controlled, too evenly spaced, as if it was counting them. Sometimes it stood outside bedroom doors for minutes at a time without moving. And in the dark, Brian could have sworn its eyes glimmered, even though there was no light nearby. By the third day, the family started complaining about strange scratching sounds at night, but no one could tell where they came from. Peter brushed it off, insisting the new dog was adjusting, though Brian knew that wasn't true. The dog barely ate, yet somehow got bigger every day. Its breathing at night was heavy and deep, echoing through the hallway like it was sitting right behind the walls. One evening, Chris said he saw the new dog standing in the corner of the living room, staring at the blank television screen as if it were watching something only it could see. On the fourth day, things got worse. Family members began disappearing one by one. First, Meg. Peter claimed she'd gone to hang out with friends, but her phone was still on the kitchen counter. Then Chris vanished. Then Lois. The house became unnervingly silent. Brian searched every room, but there were no signs of where anyone had gone. The new dog, already enormous now, spent most of its time sitting by the basement door, guarding it like something was down there. By evening, even Peter was gone. No note, no explanation, just silence. Brian realized he was alone in a house that felt less and less like home, with only that strange dog left, watching him more openly now. He gathered his courage and walked toward the living room, determined to figure out what was happening. But as he reached the stairs, the lights suddenly went out. Heavy breathing echoed through the darkness, closer than ever. The lamps flickered once, and Brian saw it. The new dog standing in the center of the room. It was far bigger than before, impossibly big, and slowly lifted its head to look directly at him with a stare that froze him in place. Brian tried to step back, and right at that moment, the episode cut to black.